Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
Oh, shoot. Can you cover for me for a second?
I guess so. Well, hi, my name's Jim, and I'm a record store owner, and I like Rush.
What are you doing?
Well, you told me to do a cover version of you.
Not quite what I had in mind, but that'll do, I suppose. Well, hello and welcome to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast. My name's Jim, and I am a record store owner.
And I am Steve, and I am a record collector.
Welcome, as we said, to another episode of whatever it is we end up doing, talking about records.
That's right.
And if you haven't guessed, we are going to talk about cover music today. I'll do my best to keep this vinyl center and vinyl related because a lot of the favorite cover tunes that I've got, I can only have digitally because they're hard to find.
Okay.
But we'll see where that takes us.
Yeah.
But because this is vinyl community, what kind of goodies did you pick up this week, sir?
Well, at my local radio Wasteland, I did pick up Dead Neighbors, which added to my immense collection of groups that begin with Dead for whatever reason. And the album was called Harmony in Hell. It came out in 1984. Kind rock with a psychobilly type feel to it. So once again, you listen to, there's like demons and stuff like that in there. It was different, but it was fun.
Close to punk or
no, much more rock, much more rock oriented on a darker edge, shall we say?
Okay.
I was sent. Michael sent me Farmer Dave and the Wizards of the West.
Okay.
Yes, it's a new album called Second Summer. It's their second album. He'd sent me the first one too. And it's Michael Christensen.
Yep.
And it is kind of a sunshiny, psych California type sound. It's really good. It's great music. And, the first one he shared this one with me, and I really like it, though that name isn't awful. I mean, Farmer Dave and the Wizards of the West. Wow. Just wow.
Get that into that title of your next video.
Yeah. And there was, then I picked up on Discogs from The Prisoners. And The Prisoners was one of the garage rock revival bands of the 80s. And it was called Revenge of the Prisoners. And it was a compilation that came out in 1984 because to get their originals cost quite a bit. But this compilation wasn't too bad. And it's a group that really... They use like it's a Doors type organ sound going on.
Yep.
So you have that darker type of garage rock feel to it. Really good. And I really enjoyed that. And the final one was Brianna Barbera. And this is off of Fuzz Club, Nothing But Time, something she put out last year. A more fuzzier, this is off Fuzz Club type with distorted guitars, but she has kind of just this voice that comes through. It's not a high pitched thing, but a little more mysterious sounding. Really
usually
good
the fuzzy guitar stuff, the droning, the vocals tend to emulate that a little bit. They don't really punch through. So this is interesting.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, her vocals come through a lot more clear because it's focused on her, but her band has that kind of sound. Really good stuff.
Well, cool.
How about you?
Just a couple this week. One was from another 80s college radio favorite, and I've never had an album of theirs before. We've got one in the store. I had another one come in, and it had an insert in there that made me go, okay, I think I'll keep this one. They were one of the bands that I liked, but I never really got into, and that's the Beat Farmers.
Yeah.
There's a couple songs I have, on my iPhone, my iPod, that I've always had in there simply because I really enjoyed the songs, but I've never delved deeper into an album. So I've got Tales of the New West, which actually one of the songs that I've had on my iPod was There She Goes Again, which is not the song you think it is. It's their own one.
Okay.
But what's actually very cool, this 1985 album from the Beat Farmers included an insert called the 1985 Beat Farmers Almanac.
Okay.
Essentially, it was a mock Farmer's Almanac that had all the liner notes to the album and the lyrics in there, and plus some other stuff. And I'm a sucker for those kind of 80s bands where they do unique things to reach out. Not quite a newsletter, but just kind of a nifty little insert to have in there. So that was a fun one to add into the collection. Plus, it's music that I dig. The other edition was a brand new one from this Friday, and it's yet another in the series that I've had. We've talked before about tribute albums, and we're going to touch on this a little bit with the cover subject today. But I brought in and kept a copy for myself, a new release of various artists' Metal Reimagined, a tribute to Pink Floyd. Now, Cleopatra Records has been doing these for a couple of years where they take a Pink Floyd album and they have various artists who have recorded at some point over the previous several years, recorded songs for that album and then reassembled that album in its entirety using nothing but guest artists. So this was the latest in that series. And it essentially recreates one of my favorite early Floyd albums, that being Meddle, Meddle, for those of you that I'm slurring this on. But this has got some decent names on there. We're talking like Bootsy Collins, Steve Stevens from Billy Idol, Alan Davies on here, Rat Scabies, kind of familiar with in there, Rick Wakeman, Terry Reid, Brian Auger, so some good psych artists in there. And then the entirety of side 2 of this is, of course, Echoes. And this features none other than Dweezil Zappa and a host of others doing it. So much like the other Pink Floyd reimagined albums that I've got in my collection, I think I've got Animals. It's a tribute to Animals, Wish You Were Here, The Wall, and Dark Side. This is a great addition to that. Plus, it's on very cool colored vinyl. But the thing that I like about these is, yes, it's cover versions, but they're not too far off from the originals. It's different to hear different vocalists in here that's not Gilmour or Waters doing something in there. But, the recreation of Fearless, one of my favorite Floyd songs as well as Echoes, is really neat. I like them. This is going to go in our conversation on cover tunes. I like them when they're not exactly the same. It's not just a recreation, but also in some cases when they're not too different, where they take it way off the reservation and make things too wild. This one is just different enough to pay homage to Metal and recreate it in a great way.
Well, I remember when you talked about this one coming in, I go, boy, I don't think I really want to hear Echo reimagined. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts about this and how you liked what they did. So that has me.
It is, and this is going to be it's going to be a good addition to my collection. The cover art is just absolutely beautiful too, and I know that doesn't do us justice on the audio side of this, but if you happen to do a look for that picture of this, it's great. And there's a couple of different vinyl variations. One's called Haze, which is the one that came up first. Looks beautiful. It matches the cover almost, but then there's like a blue version and a Coke bottle green coming over the next 2 weeks. Cleopatra spaces their stuff out for some odd reason. But no, a great Pink Floyd album, and I think that this is a very, very cool tribute a la cover album on here as well. So before we delve into our discussion proper of cover tunes today, we do have to offer a couple of corrections. We got a comment on the podcast from a YouTube listener saying that we got a couple things wrong last week when we were talking about longevity, bands with longevity, and those who had original members and such. You want to start with the correction on the
one
Johnny
of them
Cash
was
side?
With Johnny Cash and Rick Rubens. I had mentioned, Rubens, who was very young in his 20s, and he was actually in his 30s when he worked with Johnny Cash, which makes sense because in his 20s was in the 80s, and that's where he was more into that rap and things.
That is just a baby.
Yes.
And then the other one was Stephen Pearcy is an original member of Rat and still going in there. And I apologize for missing that. That was I got that off of I think I found that web page that talked about bands, and they got it wrong. So because I didn't fact check, I got it wrong. So thank you out there for fact checking us on this and keeping us on our toes, because we're just literally two guys talking about records.
We used to have writers, but they've been on strike with this whole thing, and it has thrown us for a loop.
Oh, having to come up with our own content is just brutal. Speaking of brutal, let's talk about cover music today, shall we?
We shall.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
Yes,
because there's a lot out there.
There is.
Now, I'm gonna state this right off, and I mentioned this earlier. This is supposed to be us talking about records, but in this case, some of this stuff is only available digitally. And I'm gonna even go back to my days as one of those Napster pirates when I was collecting digital files in that way, because that was such a great rabbit hole to go down. And I found a lot of cool cover tunes in that fashion. Some I sought out that were available on vinyl, and I found them. Others were not, and I just still have those those digital files if you're part of the RIAA. My name is... Never mind. I was going to drop another name there, but we'll just go from there. So some of these are going to be digital. This is also one of those things where I wish we didn't have to dance around the copyright police.
Oh, sure.
Because I'd love to be able to play some sound samples from these, but you, dear listeners, will maybe have to go off and do a little digging on your own. If we can find them, I think maybe we can put together a playlist on Spotify of some of these. But otherwise, feel free to look some of these up because I think they're cool. You may think they're not. Some of the ones that I think are not cool, you guys might really, really dig.
Yeah, and that's the neat thing with cover versions, and oftentimes we don't even know. We sit there and we think, wow, what a great original song. Years later, you find out, what? That was someone else did that?
Some of my favorite tunes turned out to be cover tunes, and may I start?
Yeah, of course.
One of the biggest ones right there, and this was only in the past 2 years. I found out that REM's "Superman" was a cover tune.
Oh,
and
really?
I guess I never really dug into it, but yes, that was actually not theirs and that's an early REM too. That one was actually created by a group called The Clique, CLIQUE, and it was from 1969, a Texas band, The Clique, put that on an album, and somehow Stipe and company got a hold of it, in the 80s, all those years later, and redid it and truly made it their own, because I'd never heard of The Clique. After I found that out, that it was indeed a cover, I dug it up. I found a Clique album on Discogs. This was several years back, and ordered it. I got a sealed one from '69, and it was good music, but the best part of it was Superman.
Yeah.
And it had kind of an early garage rock, psych rock feel to it that you can hear in the REM version a little bit, but the rest of the album was just bubblegum pop. And so the original version of Superman stuck out like a really sore thumb in that. And I ended up getting rid of the album, and I just have a digital version of the song now.
Wow. One that comes to my mind was in the 80s. It was done by Camper von Beethoven. They did Pictures of Matchstick Men. I bought, when I listened, that was off Key Lime Pie. I go, wow, this song is so good. And I played it over and over. Years later, I find out I'd never listened to Status Quo, so I didn't know anything about it. Find out it was their song.
Yep.
I like Camper von Beethoven's better, though.
That's another one that I'll toss in that category of liking more than the original as well.
Yeah, I did wind up buying the original just because of that Picture of Matchstick Men. But boy, I tell you, to find that Key Lime Pies, that's hard now. And that thing it's not cheap anymore.
One of the other ones that the song is a lot more famous, probably because of the movie The Big Lebowski, is Kenny Rogers and the first edition doing Just Dropped In to see what condition my condition is in. And this one, I guess I never really paid much more attention beyond the fact that it was in the movie and it worked well in the scene in The Big Lebowski when he's kind of going on that acid trip. But that's actually a cover tune as well from someone named Mickey Newberry, a country artist, which kind of makes sense because Kenny Rogers told that, he was walking that line between psychedelic rock and country and ultimately came down on the countryside. But the first edition did some really cool psych work with that, but the original version is almost country psych from Mickey Newberry.
Hadn't heard that.
Yeah, that's another one.
One for me was the Talking Heads' "Take Me to the River."
Okay, now that's one I didn't know.
Yeah, it's Al Green did that song.
Okay.
And again, that was the song that hooked me into the Talking Heads. I saw it on Saturday Night Live. They performed that. And I go, this is amazing. I went out the next day and bought that album and absolutely loved it. And then a few years later, I find out Al Green had done it. I didn't have any Al Green albums at the time. It's like, well, how about that? I like the Talking Heads version better, though.
That is there. Now, I found a website that it's the Culture Trip that lists 25 famous songs that you didn't know that were covers. Now, granted, some of you folks are probably going to know these. Some of these, I'm sure you and I do. Maybe some of these will be a surprise. But number one, and again, I didn't pay too much attention to this. I'm aware of the song, obviously, but Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper is a cover tune.
No kidding.
Yep.
I thought she did. Here, I've been giving her credit all these years. I go to parties and I brag that up. Cyndi Lauper did that. Wow.
New wave musician named Robert Hazard from the Philadelphia club scene during the 80s recorded the song's demo first and probably got a hold of it. Now, this one, I think a lot of folks know this, and that's Manfred Mann doing Blinded by the Light.
Yep.
And that's actually Bruce Springsteen. Now we can discuss whether or not the lyrics are what everybody thinks they are. Let's see. I Want Candy from Bow Wow Wow. That's kind of that's a given. I'm pretty sure on that.
Yeah.
That's a Bo Diddley track, right?
Yeah.
Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll.
Yes, I knew that was a cover. That also, actually, now I'm just going into that song. It also pops onto my worst cover of all time. Britney Spears does a version of that. And you can find it on YouTube, and it's enough to make your skin crawl. Here she's saying she loves rock and roll with the whole Britney vibe going on. It's like, seriously, this is a fail.
That's just not right.
No.
This one I knew as well, but not for a long time. I found this out several years back, but Elvis doing Hound Dog, one of his signature early hits, all the way back to the soul singer Big Mama Thornton.
Yes, that's right.
Thornton. I've got to say that right. So much so that I think there were lawsuits involved.
There
with that.
was lawsuits. She was mad. She never got over that one on stuff I've read. That was Big Mama, man.
Yes, indeed. Dolly Parton doing I Will Always Love You, made much more famous by Whitney Houston.
Yes.
I think we knew that one as well.
Yep.
So the Fugees, Killing Me Softly, there's another given, I think, but most folks know this. Let's see, Drift Away. Okay, no, come on. I didn't even know Uncle Kracker did a version of Drift Away.
I didn't either.
So let's add that to the list of songs I didn't know were covers because Dobie Gray did that.
Yeah.
Who's Uncle Kracker?
That's right. That's what most people are saying, Uncle Kracker.
Now, this was a big one, too. And I knew about this, and I think I actually did a video on this on our channel several years back, but that was Dazed and Confused by Led Zeppelin, where Jimmy Page kind of, when he was a Yardbird, co-opted that tune after hearing it in a club in New York from a psych folk artist named Jake Holmes. Okay. And I think that there were some lawsuits involved with this one as well, but where Page didn't even acknowledge it. But he had reinterpreted the song so much by the time Zeppelin recorded it that, it's like, Jake who?
Yeah, that happened to Zepp a few times where they were being sued, but then they did the same to anybody else.
Yeah, and that's where we can kind of talk about some of these bands from the 60s, especially the mid-60s. You get in there with the likes of the Rolling Stones. Their first, one or two albums consisted primarily of covers of old blues tunes.
Yeah, and blues tunes, when you go back to blues tunes, it is an incredible amount of rock and roll that was taken from that. But that's what was out there. I mean, that was the edgy music, and they just made it more for a white audience.
That's a great way to look at it. And there were, we keep talking lawsuits. There were several lawsuits that came up, but a lot of animosity regardless, because some of these blues singers had passed away long before these songs were made popular.
Yes, and the whole copyright thing where they'd signed it away, just the way contracts were made back then, not thinking that something else is going to happen to make it hugely popular.
And the Beatles, another, we mentioned the Stones, but the Beatles, again, another act that really owes its early success, and Elvis as well, obviously, we talked about,
Huge.
To those old singers.
Yeah, if you were to go back to all those albums, you would be probably shocked at the amount of cover tunes that are in all of them. Some of these groups, they'd find one hit, two hits, and then they would make a bunch of cover tunes. And it was all over the place. And it still happens to this day. Or now you have artists just doing full albums, especially the older ones, of cover tunes.
That really, I think, speaks to, I don't want to delve too deeply into this, but my thoughts on this is that there is really a finite number of notes or of lyrics that can be constructed. Some work better than others. And granted, I know these numbers of the songs that can be created and still are being created are in the millions, but at some point, you just kind of run out of ways to reconstruct or construct things.
Yeah. The song that, from a few articles that I read, Lord knows, but we're just going to go with it, that has been copied more than any other song is Yesterday by the Beatles.
Really?
2,200 versions, over 2,200 versions of that. That's a full record collection. If you just want, I'm going to collect yesterday, and you could go wild. Then they went like to Satisfaction from the Rolling Stones on a couple of these, like 400 versions. This is where I know that some of this information's wrong, because think of the song "Hey Joe."
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hey Joe, it was actually, it's said that 3 different people claimed to have written Hey Joe. One, well, that was my title. One, well, I wrote those kind of lyrics. Well, heck, the blues had, this kind of stuff all along. But there has been 1,800 versions of Hey Joe out there. I think I got 900 of them in my collection alone. My favorite is Patti Smith's version. She slows it down and really brings pure emotion to that song. Most people will think Jimi Hendrix, but any garage rock band is doing Hey Joe.
Oh, yeah. It's a given. And this is what's kind of neat. When you get these songs that have been covered by multiple artists, me at least, I think it's neat because I'm a geek, obviously, but it's neat to kind of compare the different ways that this song is interpreted. One of them that I've got loaded onto, several spots on my iPod, iPhone, whatever I've got now in this, is the song Lightnin' Bar Blues. And originally done by Hoyt Axton. For some reason, this song kind of latches onto me, and I became a little more familiar with this from the Arlo Guthrie version. I think it was his Hobo album. And from there, I'm like, well, this is kind of a cool song, but I see that it was written by Hoyt Axton, so I did some research. Well, who else has done this? And each one of these is kind of a really unique take, and they're from a different, wide variety of genres. Starting off with the country version by Hoyt Axton, kind of the psych folk version from Arlo Guthrie, but then Brownsville Station did a version of it in 1973, Commander Cody, but you still kind of got that country feel to them, obviously, from the original. But then, come 1982, you get the band Hanoi Rocks doing really kind of a hair band version of Lightnin' Bar Blues that kicks out there. And then Linda Ronstadt did one just back in 1999, released 10 years after she recorded it, but it never came out for some reason. But that's one of those songs that I think is open to lots of different ways to interpret it, and I think it's just a great song.
Elvis Presley, as we talked about, did a lot of covers. One that fascinated me was his song "Love Me Tender." Mm-hmm. That's from the Civil War era.
Really?
Yes, it was. Orrin Lee was what it was called, the name of the original song. But the lyrics were pretty much back from this Civil War song, and is what they updated it slightly for modern times, but. You know what? There's stuff out there, and people. You just go back, you find it. They probably didn't have to pay copyright rights for that.
Probably not. Well, the Colonel was involved at one point, right?
Yes. Well, he probably wrote. Maybe he was the one that wrote it back then. Except he was from Europe.
So, what are some of your favorite cover tunes, Steve?
Some of my favorites. One is "Sweet Jane" by the Cowboy Junkies.
Oh, yes.
That is probably one of the most gorgeous songs. Sweet Jane itself is a nice song, but to take it and slow it down and to make such a beautiful version of it, it's so outstanding. I've never heard a better version of that song.
That's a good one to have in there too. I'm very familiar with the Cowboy Junkies version. And yeah, the Lou Reed Velvet version, it's Lou Reed, right? Straight up. It's not Velvet. So the Lou Reed version is slow in its own right, but in a different way than the Cowboy Junkies.
Yeah, actually it is on a Velvet Underground, Loaded. It's on
that's
Loaded.
Right. Yes, thank you.
Lou Reed wrote it,
yep.
But yes. Another one that really I really love is Johnny Cash's "The Hurt." He took from 9 Inch Nails. Yep. Again, taking a song and slowing it down. What I found on a lot of these cover tunes, the ones I like is when they really slowed it down, and so they brought a whole different vibe to that song. And I've really enjoyed when they've done that. Now, obviously, some artists can do it and it just doesn't work, but for the most part, even I think of Izzy, Israel Kamo Kayawawa. He's from Hawaii. He did a mix of Somewhere Over the Rainbow and It's a Wonderful World. And he put these two songs together. And this was this huge man. He had this high, tender voice. And Izzy's, I believe, is what he went by. And I had some of his CDs, and he was from Hawaii. And he had passed away a few years back. But the beauty of this song, where he goes somewhere over the rainbow, switches into Wonderful World, goes back to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, incredible sounding song, and it's an emotional song.
You're getting into a genre of itself called mashups, where they're kind of tying two things together.
Yes.
There's one by an artist. His name is Mike Greer, but he goes by Puddle's Pity Party. Dresses as a clown in full makeup, and he does. And we're kind of getting into parody covers, and I wanted to try to steer clear of those types, because then that takes us down to that whole Richard Cheese and Dred Zeppelin, which are cool in their own right. But Puddle's Pity Party actually did a mashup of Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues and Pinball Wizard from The Who. That works so tremendously. It's great. But I don't want to go down to that whole mashup parody side.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, I've been thinking, I've got, as I mentioned, a fairly extensive collection on here. There is a cover album, and you mentioned some artists do cover albums. And I'm going to bring Rush up again because I'm Jim. I like Rush, as you said. But back in 2004, Rush put out an album, and it was an EP really, called Feedback, which they wanted to pay tribute to songs that influenced them early in their career. And when you think of Rush, you do not think of a band that includes covers, because they never have in any of their other albums. And only their later live stuff included some stuff from Feedback. But on this, they covered, and some of my favorite versions of this, the Yardbirds is great, but Rush did a version of Heart Full of Soul and For What It's Worth on this Feedback album. Then there's they do 7 and 7 and Shapes of Thing, another Yardbird, and then Mr. Soul, the Seeker, and Summertime Blues. But their version of Heart Full of Soul and For What It's Worth, I think, are just really great versions of that. Another one that I really dig, and I'm going to go right back to that For What It's Worth, the Buffalo Springfield, is by a group called Art. And this was a psych album I found, a little while back, but man, is it it's a valuable one when you find it in there. But this was originally released in 1967. The album is called Supernatural Fairy Tales. And at a time when a lot of these other up-and-coming bands, especially in the late 60s, kind of glommed on to songs that were maybe only a year or two old, 3 years old, and re-recording them back when copyright was a little more fast and loose, they did a version of For What It's Worth, but they called it What's That Sound? And it really took the Buffalo Springfield kind of a folk garage. Am I going to get in trouble for calling them that or not? It's Buffalo Springfield. Yeah. But they turned it into just a true psychedelic rock song at that point, and just changed the name a little bit, but still it maintained its For What It's Worth. Other ones that I think come through, I was on a kick for a while. There was a website called the AV Club, kind of a culture website where they do video and games and such. But they had a series on their YouTube channel several years back called AV Club Covers. Really neat concept, where they took, at the beginning of whatever season, they took 15, 20 cover songs, popular songs, and then they scheduled 15, 20 bands, current popular bands, and depending on how they scheduled them, they invited them into their small studio at the AV Club, and the first band got their pick of the entire list and got to do their version of a song. And they worked their way through the list week by week by week through each of these bands until the last band had nothing to choose but that last song that was left on there.
Okay.
And that created some really interesting live versions of covers. One of my favorites off of this entire series was They Might Be Giants covering Chumbawamba's Tub Thumping. Now, Tub Thumping and Chumbawamba, you want your absolute poster child for one-hit wonders.
Yeah.
That's them. The song was never really, I think, a great song. It had a hook that you could sing along to, but it's not one that I would have ever thought, I'm going to go get this entire album because Chumbawamba is the greatest in the world. But They Might Be Giants did a live version where they invited a bunch of the staff members from AV Club into the studio with them, and they just killed it with this song. The version of Tub Thumping. If you can look for that one, please do. I guarantee you'll be amused. So that's a cool one. And then the only other one that I think really stands out is And this is going to sound a little bit odd, but this is from an album called Dr. Demento Goes Punk. And it was from a couple of years back. Dr. Demento, radio host, got Weird Al his start, lots of other novelty acts. But he put together an album of punk bands covering his old Dr. Demento novelty hits, including one from the Vandals, which are a great cover band in and amongst themselves, doing Tom Lehrer's National Brotherhood Week. And they updated this piano satire into a true punk rock song that I think is great.
Wait, I'm just to toss out Devo's Satisfaction.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about take a classic, which is dangerous to take a song like Satisfaction with that riff and totally make it into something else that was just blew you away. My God, that was quirky and so much fun. Jimi Hendrix, All Along the Watchtower from Bob Dylan. Totally changed that song into such a classic. And then probably one of the greatest groups to ever change songs, Ike and Tina Turner. Think how many different ones they've done. Just Proud Mary alone, that take a Creedence song and coming up with their version. But they did so many covers because they funked it up. And threw in that band. And my God, they were really good. And one of my favorite artists for doing great cover versions is Grace Jones. And, she did like Demolition Man from The Police. She did Use Me from Bill Withers, which is just outstanding. Night Clubbing from Iggy Pop. Every one of these. And that list goes on. But with her producers, she made those her own. And they were so good. A little reggae in it. Excellent stuff.
And I think that goes back to, what we talked about earlier. If you can skip genre a little bit, I think that makes the effort to cover something a little more effective, and the outer product of that.
Agree. It brings it twists it into something new instead of just sounding like the same thing. We can go back to Hey Joe. Many of the covers sound just like Hey Joe. They didn't change it up. Patti Smith changed it up.
Okay, so those are some of our favorites. Now, for me at least, and I think probably for you and maybe you too as well, dear listeners, sometimes there's a swing and a miss when it comes to a cover tune. Stuff that should not exist yet somehow does.
Yes.
Do you have any? Because I've got a bunch.
I'll just go through a little bit of a list here of them. One of them, some people think is great, but Sid Vicious, My Way. I refuse even to buy that. I cannot handle his version of My Way.
See, now that's one I actually don't mind, but we've talked about this before, where you just, it's like nails on a chalkboard.
It is. William Shatner, the man that can ruin any song. He sang Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and absolutely destroyed that it's just awful.
I'm going to disagree with you just once for one song for Shatner, and because I totally agree but his stuff, I think, really kind of hits that novelty side of things as well. Yet he still continues to release these collaborations. He did a version of Common People originally done by Pulp on one of his many albums. By Pulp, that's actually pretty darn good. So, but for the most part, yes, Shatner. Anything.
Right. Mick Jagger, David Bowie, Dancing in the Streets.
Yeah, that's painful.
Yeah, it went to number 7, but that was awful. That was, poor Martha Reeves and the Vandells. Cyndi Lauper did a version. This is on YouTube. What's Going On from Marvin Gaye.
Oh.
And it wasn't right. It wasn't any good. And I'm just going to throw one because I already talked about Britney Spears. Motley Crue did Anarchy in the UK. Except they used Anarchy in the USA.
I remember that.
Yeah, and that was just, put a bullet in the gun and, oh my God, stop it.
Now, some of these, again, the Shatner stuff I think is meant to be tongue-in-cheek, and we're borderline that parody/novelty. But some of them are done very seriously, and that becomes a little nerve-wracking when they're trying, and it just sucks.
And it's, what? It's to each its own. Some are going to go, what do you mean? I love that. I'm sure that you got something in there that I think is great. So fire away, Jim.
All right. There is a few that I dislike, but Some I dislike so much that I like them because I get to be a fan of, bad movies. So I'll throw some of this bad music. I've already admitted to liking a Shatner tune. There was an album released in 2002, but compact disc only. And trust me, I've looked for the vinyl on this one because it's so bad. I really would like this in my collection. I think I even suggested this on a forum to Record Store Day that they consider putting this in a release down the line. The album is by an artist named Kelvin Soling, and he's not so much an artist, but he compiled a list of artists and put them together for this album called When Pigs Fly. Essentially, it's songs you never thought you'd hear, a compilation album of cover tunes by artists that have absolutely zero business covering the songs that they did. So, are you ready for this? We'll go down this. The most horrible one on here by any way, shape, or means is a cover of Peter Gabriel's Shock the Monkey, sung by Don Ho.
Ooh.
Don Ho, Tiny Bubbles, Hawaiian. And it's slowed down, but he's just almost kind of slurring through this, that it's just, what in the world were you thinking? The Fix does like about a 6-minute version of Nancy Sinatra, These Boots Were Made for Walking, that just, and when you start listening to it, hey, that's kind of cool. And then it just goes and goes and goes. And you're like, okay, checking your watch. Is it about done?
It was only a 2-minute song.
Devo doing Ohio by Crosby, Stills.
Well, they were there for that. They were in college then.
They were.
Yes.
But, Roy Clark doing What a Wonderful World. Billy Preston doing Girls on Film is on here. Another terrible, terrible version sung by the Oak Ridge Boys doing Carry On My Wayward Son. And they're trying to countryfy that, and it just did not work. And then Leslie Gore doing Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is on here as well. And then Herman's Hermits doing White Wedding. And this is following into that Kishy side where it's unmistakably Herman's Hermits. They really kind of make it sound like Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Wedding. And it's just not good. So those are a few of the ones, but I'm kind of iffy to say I dislike them because some of them I dislike so much I think they're cool and I just want to have them on my phone just because, hey, you got to hear how horrible this is.
That's a very weird concept.
Very. Now, I don't know what to think about this next one. I did listen to one of these songs, and this is for an upcoming album, an EP. You ready for this?
Yeah.
This is going to hurt your brain even worse than Don Ho singing Peter Gabriel. This I found in our upcoming releases, and it's due for a November 3rd release this year. All right, folks, I apologize. The name of the album is Dolenz Sings REM. And this is, yes, Mickey Dolenz, the last remaining monkey, singing 4 REM tunes on an EP.
Why? Why?
Some of these questions aren't meant to be answered.
Of all the things we got, I'm going to do REM. And someone thought it was a good idea.
Someone did, and I don't know if it was Dolenz or somebody out there, but the description says 7A Records are proud to announce the release of Mickey Dolenz Sings REM, a 4-track EP comprised of songs REM wrote throughout their career, all beautifully reimagined by Mickey Dolenz and producer Christian Nesmith. Michael's son, apparently. It features fresh and completely new arrangements of some of REM's most memorable and catchy songs. Dolenz says, quote, once again, this EP reaffirms my long-held conviction that a solid recording always begins with solid material. And you don't get much more solid than REM. I don't know where to go. So Shiny Happy People, Radio Free Europe, Man in the Moon, and Leaving New York, sung by an aged Mickey Dolenz.
Wow.
Should I put you down for one?
Yeah.
No. Here's the real shocker. A 4-song EP, they're going to clock in at $27.
Oh, my God. Wow.
That's the true crime, right?
Yeah,
there.
from a guy that's about 90. Wow.
So, cover tunes, love them, hate them?
For the most part, I like them. And it's always fun when you find out that, you thought it was an original, and many years later you go, what? That was a cover?
That's always fun to kick into that too.
It is.
I seek them out whenever I can. As you mentioned, a lot of new artists are, dropping one here or there on new albums, and it's interesting to hear their take. If it works, cool. If it doesn't work, yeah, they did a try, and maybe it won't sell on through there. But it's something that, as I said earlier, given the finite number of notes and lyrics that can be combined, it's inevitable that you're going to get new versions of old stuff because it's another way to reach younger people too.
It is. And artists eventually sometimes, as they're making an album, I need 2 more songs on here. Let's go for the cover version. How often does that happen?
Well, what about you folks? Do you have a favorite or a not so favorite cover tune? Please let us know in the comments. I think you can comment on Spotify. I think you can comment on Podbean, but you can on YouTube for certain as well. Feel free to fact check us on some of these, saying that Shatner had a bigger hit.
Yeah.
So until next week, my name's Jim. I own a record store and I listen to Rush. Let's go with the OG on that one, shall we,
Okay,
Steve?
we'll go with the OG. And I am Steve, a record collector who does not listen to Rush.
You folks have a great week.
Bye.